A tank can lose a battle without being lost. Break a track, damage the steering, drown the engine in sand, or punch a hole through a component that can be replaced, and the tank stops. To its crew, that moment can be terrifying. To the enemy gunner, it may look like a kill. But to the men approaching later with cables, shackles, and a recovery tractor, it is not yet a verdict. During operations Lightfoot and Supercharge at Alamein, one British workshop organization recorded the recovery of 172 tanks. It also recovered 103 armored cars and related vehicles, and 236 ordinary military vehicles, 511 machines in all. The question was not simply how many tanks Britain possessed. It was how many could be made ready again before the next fight. And behind that question stood one of the least glamorous machines in the desert, the Scammell Pioneer. On a map, an armored unit is represented by a symbol. On a morning strength return, it is represented by a number. Neither tells you how many tanks will still move at dusk. A tank could become a casualty without being destroyed. It might be hit by enemy fire, immobilized by a mine, bogged in soft ground, or halted by mechanical failure. British cruiser tanks in the desert were especially vulnerable to mechanical trouble. Heat, dust, and long movement punished engines, tracks, and transmissions even before the enemy fired. What happened next depended on four things. How badly was the tank damaged? Who controlled the ground around it? Could a recovery crew reach it? And was the time, labor, and material needed to repair it worth paying? This is the real economy of tanks. A factory adds vehicles to an army from hundreds or thousands of miles away. Recovery works at the other end of the equation. It tries to prevent a temporary failure from becoming a permanent loss. But recovery could not perform miracles. A burned-out hull, a tank trapped beyond friendly lines, or a vehicle whose recovery endangered more men and machines than it was worth could still be abandoned or written off. So the first important machine in this story is not the Scammell. It is a decision tree. Before October 1942, responsibility for maintaining Britain's growing mass of technical equipment was divided among several arms and services. That arrangement had evolved in a smaller army. Under the strain of mechanized war, it became increasingly inefficient. The Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, REME, was formally created on 1 October 1942. It drew on an existing Royal Army Ordnance Corps engineering organization and technical personnel transferred from the Royal Engineers, the Royal Army Service Corps, and elsewhere. 22 days later, the Second Battle of El Alamein began. The new badge did not magically create trained mechanics. It brought existing skills into a more coherent system. The recovery trade demanded more than driving a large truck. Wartime requirements included understanding vehicle weights and construction, estimating the pull a job required, detecting mines, and recovering vehicles by day or night under field conditions. A 1943 War Office training film makes the chain of responsibility explicit. A recovery call produced a casualty card and map reference. On arrival, the recovery NCO inspected the ground and the mechanical condition of the casualty. He chose the direction of pull, the equipment, and the signals. The man who planned the recovery controlled it. That mattered because a cable under heavy load stores lethal energy. A bad angle could damage the tank, overturn the recovery vehicle, tear out an attachment point, or kill someone standing in the wrong place. The Scammell gave the crew force. Training turned that force into control. By conventional military standards, the Scammell Pioneer looked like a collection of disadvantages. It was tall, slow, and unarmored. The recovery version drove only its 4 rear wheels. It could not fight its way to a casualty, and it could not protect its crew from artillery or small arms fire. But battlefield recovery required something different from a tank. The rear wheels on each side could pivot around a common center. As one wheel climbed, the other could drop, helping the tires remain in contact with broken ground. Large tires spread the load. The result was not invulnerability to mud or sand, but useful traction where an ordinary rigid truck could lose contact and spin. Then came the winch. The official training film rated its direct pull at 8 tons. That figure did not mean the Scammell could move only an 8-ton casualty. By routing the cable through snatch blocks, the crew could trade speed and cable travel for mechanical advantage. In one filmed recovery problem, a Churchill lay bellied across a gully with a track thrown. The NCO calculated that the job required roughly 35 tons of pull. The crew laid out a 5-to-1 tackle. For every 5 feet of cable taken in, the tank moved only about 1 foot, but it moved slowly and under control. That is what the specification meant on the battlefield. 8 tons at the drum became enough force to shift a much heavier tank because trained men built a temporary machine out of cable, anchors, and pulleys. The rear jib served another purpose. It could lift part of a casualty for a suspended tow or help crews work on wheels and axles. It was not a crane for casually lifting an entire tank. And when a disabled tank needed to travel farther, a Scammell tank transporter variant could carry it on a trailer. The recovery tractor and the transporter were related pioneers, but they were not the same vehicle and should not be shown interchangeably. Alamein turned these procedures into an industrial operation conducted beside a battle. The offensive opened on the night of 23 October 1942. During Operation Lightfoot, infantry and engineers worked to open passages through deep axis minefields. Armor trying to move through those lanes became congested and vulnerable to anti-tank fire. Vehicles also struck mines, broke tracks, and suffered mechanical failures in ground already churned by movement and explosions. On the night of 1 November, Operation Supercharge began the final effort to break the Axis position. For the workshops, every advance changed the recovery problem. A casualty that had been exposed in front of British positions might become reachable. A safe route might become mined or shelled. A tank that could have been repaired quickly might deteriorate after hours in the open. The report from 1st Armored Division workshops gives the surviving scale: 172 tanks, 103 armored cars and related vehicles, and 236 B vehicles recovered during Lightfoot and Supercharge. Those categories also reveal how misleading it is to imagine recovery as a service reserved for tanks. A blocked fuel lorry, ammunition truck, or workshop vehicle could interrupt the same armored formation. The Scammell might be the most visually impressive machine in the chain, but combat power depended on recovering the vehicles that fed, armed, and repaired the tanks, as well as the tanks themselves. The ledger is not merely a list of rescued objects. It is a cross-section of an army trying to keep moving. It also preserves the environment in which the crews worked. Major General Eric Rowcroft congratulated them for operating amid dust, bombs, and shells while the battle was still raging. The report does not say that one Scammell recovered all of them. It does not say that all 511 were repaired. What it proves is that recovery was not an occasional act performed after the shooting stopped. It was a continuous traffic of damaged machines moving away from danger, while repaired and replacement machines moved toward it. The 1943 training film allows us to reconstruct the procedure, although not a specific named incident at Alamein. First, locate the casualty and reconnoiter the route. Then inspect the ground, the damage, and the available attachment points. Position the recovery vehicle in line with the intended pull. Anchor it with skid pans or ground holdfasts. Run out the cable. Inspect every shackle. Take up the slack gently. Pull slowly. Stop, reassess, and only then tow or transport the casualty to a workshop. Each step consumed time. Each exposed men who had little armor and no dramatic weapon with which to answer the enemy. Their defense was preparation, darkness when available, disciplined signaling, and the ability to leave before the situation changed. This is where the Scamell's low speed becomes less important than its ability to apply force predictably. Recovery was not a race to the wreck. It was a race against changing conditions. Pulling a tank clear did not return it to battle. It merely delivered a decision to the next stage. Some casualties needed work that could be completed forward. A track might be repaired, a damaged component replaced, or a vehicle made mobile enough to travel under its own power. Other jobs went back to larger workshops with heavier tools and more specialized trades. A machine beyond economical repair could still become a source of scarce parts. This created a second battlefield behind the battlefield, a queue of engines, gearboxes, suspension units, cracked fittings, and damaged electrical systems, all competing for labor and spares. The desert did not respect neat trade boundaries. A REME account of Middle East workshops records that driver mechanics and motor mechanics worked as fitters on tanks, guns, and ordinary vehicles, while men formerly classified in other fitting trades turned to whatever job had become urgent. In an expeditionary force, the label around a man's neck mattered less than the casualty blocking tomorrow's program. That flexibility increased capacity, but it also depended on experience that could not be manufactured as quickly as a spare part. The most repairable tank was not always the first priority. A commander might need a particular model. A workshop might return several lightly damaged vehicles in the time required to rebuild one severe casualty. A repair that made sense during a pause could become too slow during a pursuit. So recovery altered the economy of armored warfare in three ways. First, it preserved choices. An abandoned tank offered none. A recovered tank could be repaired, stripped for parts, examined for lessons, or written off after inspection rather than guesswork. Second, it shortened the replacement chain. A repaired vehicle did not have to be manufactured in Britain, shipped through threatened sea lanes, delivered to Egypt, and prepared for combat from scratch. Third, it converted control of the battlefield into material value. The army that held the ground after an engagement could reach more of its casualties. Retreat could turn repairable damage into permanent loss because workshops and recovery vehicles had to move before the wrecks did. But there was a cost. Recovery tractors needed fuel, tires, cable, and trained crews. Towing a hopeless wreck could waste hours and endanger another vehicle. Workshops could become clogged with machines that absorbed parts without returning quickly to service. Good recovery, therefore, depended on saying no as intelligently as it said yes. The Pioneer now risks acquiring the wrong kind of legend. It did not make every knocked-out tank recoverable. It could not tow a burned hull back into fighting condition. It could not cross an enemy position because its suspension was clever. Its crew still needed a route, security, anchors, and enough information to choose the right tackle. Nor did it work alone. Light recovery vehicles handled smaller casualties. Tank transporters carried machines over distance. Workshops supplied fitters, tools, and spares. Tracked recovery vehicles could work closer to armor and in conditions where a wheeled tractor was the wrong answer. As tanks grew heavier, the British Army also employed larger transporters and wreckers. Even the wartime training film needs to be read carefully. It presents the Scammell as capable of going almost anywhere and solving almost any recovery problem. That was the language of instruction and morale. The same film repeatedly shows the limits hidden inside the boast: reconnaissance before movement, the smoothest available route, strict alignment, anchoring, multiplied cable layouts, and constant inspection. The real achievement was not that the vehicle defeated physics. It gave a trained crew enough control to work with physics. This also explains why the most dramatic number should not become the whole story. The REME Museum repeats a broader claim that 244 tanks were recovered at Alamein and more than 1,000 repaired. That may derive from core records, but the underlying table is not reproduced in the accessible source used here. Our firm foundation remains the narrower archival report from 1st Armored Division workshops. Precision makes the story stronger. It shows what one workshop organization handled without pretending that every British recovery, every repair, and every returned tank belonged to a single truck. So did the Scammell Pioneer keep British tanks fighting? Yes, but not because it was a secret super vehicle, and not because an 8-ton winch could somehow erase battle damage. It mattered because it occupied a critical place in a system. The recovery NCO judged the casualty. The crew built the pole. The Pioneer supplied controlled force across difficult ground. The transporter moved the load. The workshop decided whether to repair, salvage, or reject it. Spare parts and trained fitters converted the decision into a machine that might move again. At Alamein, the report from 1st Armored Division workshops recorded 511 recoveries during 2 major operations. Its 172 tanks were not 172 confirmed returns to combat. They were 172 opportunities that would have disappeared if the battlefield, the crews, or the recovery equipment had been lost. That is why a tank can lose a battle without being lost. Armored strength is not a static inventory of guns and hulls. It is a circulation system: crews, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, recovery vehicles, workshops, and time. The Scammell Pioneer looked ungainly because beauty was never the requirement. Its purpose was to reach a machine that could no longer move, apply force without making the damage worse, and bring that machine back into the chain of decisions. The real strength of an armored force is not only how many tanks it owns. It is how many it can make ready again before the next battle.